Major news just dropped. CRS is now partnering with Airbnb to have access over 7 million properties in the US. The biggest thing that's going to start happening is you're going to start to see more people get involved in the midterm rental space. You're going to start to see institutional shifts, which I've actually been talking about for years now, and we're starting to see it in real time. But the crazy thing about this is my students and I have been anxiously waiting this moment, and we're actually positioned right now to be far ahead of everybody else as these shifts start to happen. Are you a midterm rental operator catering specifically to temporary housing companies? Well, we're going to break this down today in this video on how this can actually be a good thing and how this is actually going to weed out a ton of other operators who are not doing the things that they need to be doing. And are you prepared for what that's going to look like? We're going to dive all into this. Watch this video. We're going to break it all down right now. So let me break down what this partnership actually means. CRS is one of the largest temporary housing platforms on the planet. So they actually do a lot of the searching for people that have lost their homes. So say you have farmers insurance, CRS will actually go after and try to find housing specifically for you. So they partner with these different insurance companies to do that. So the crazy part about all this is that now CRS has access to over 7 million properties across the entire globe. And this is where this can be a game changer for a lot of people. One of the other things that I want to make sure that you guys remember, and I've talked about this so many times before, is that Airbnb knows midterm rentals are on the rise. In fact, 20% of their income over the last several years has come from 28-day stays or more. And that's a huge shift with Airbnb starting to actually focus on generating connections with companies that are actually going to serve those types of clients. And I've been talking about this for a long time, where institutional capital has been getting involved in the midterm rental space. Go back to 2022, Blackstone invested into purchasing extended stay hotels. This is a big deal because it's not only institutional capital that's coming in, this is a big mark for the shift of midterm rentals actually becoming an asset class in the future, just like short-term rentals, long-term rentals, etc. But you, if you're positioned in the right way, can actually take advantage of the swell that's coming through. This is actually what I've been telling my students for years now, to be ready for these shifts when they happen. And this is why building relationships and starting to continue to focus outside of insurance temporary housing is by far one of the biggest flexes, especially if you're looking at building a long roadway. And that's exactly what you do. You have to make sure to think about relationships. Let's actually break down why hosts aren't actually ready for this specific change. Most Airbnb hosts are completely unprepared for this entire shift. Weekend hosts don't understand the needs of displaced families. And this is something that I can tell you now, if you've hosted a family that has lost their home due to a fire or flood, and you've actually walked in, sat down with them, and had a chance to actually have conversation. This is not just like hosting a family over the weekend. This is actually people who are suffering through the loss of a home, which can be extremely devastating. And I've actually come to tears myself communicating with a woman named Irene back in 2017. She had lost her home due to a fire, actually lost a pet. She was staying in 2 separate hotels. And the crazy thing about this is she walked the house. We all sat down at the very end. She looked at me and she said, "Jesse, the only thing that I want to be able to do is have dinner with my family at a dinner table." Her and her son were in 2 different rooms. Her husband was in another room. Like, all they ever did was just sat to dinner with each other. That's what they just wanted. The most simple, basic thing. And I can't tell you guys, that moment right there shifted the entire way how I actually looked at temporary housing folks. And I started to look at it not from a financial standpoint, but more of I'm actually taking care of people in real estate. And those 2 things being combined together is just magical. I'm getting goosebumps right now talking about this. I don't know if you guys can see this at all. The other thing about hosts is they can actually provide property walkthroughs. A lot of the times, not all the time, but I'm saying like 99% of the times, families who have lost their home are going to want to walk through these properties. They want to make sure it feels right. They want to make sure they have a connection to it. And they sure as hell want to make sure that it's a comfortable place to stay in. Traditional landlords, like if they're on Airbnb or they're on Zillow or other platforms, they don't actually know what it's like to have these insurance companies actually reach out, which is a big deterrent for a lot of these companies, that they reach out to folks on Zillow and other platforms, and they think it's a scam. They think, why would somebody want to pay for a month or 2 or 3 when the traditional landlord actually has a year lease and that's what's requested, and you have a company that's randomly saying, hey, we'll pay you 2x long-term rental rates for just 3 months. Traditional landlords don't want anything to do with that. But this is actually where my students have been able to serve this market for years, and not only just this market, but many other markets, because I've been positioning themselves to be in a space that can allow them to continue to grow. They understand that market, and they understand what relationships are all about when you're connecting with relocation specialists, and that's what these folks on Airbnb are not going to get. I want to also break this down. Anytime somebody loses their home due to a fire or flood, or again, a catastrophic event, there's what's called additional living expense coverage. Every single policyholder has a totally different type of dollar amount. That ALE expense is actually, family might have $100,000 for additional housing for that year, but every single policy is totally different. And one of the biggest misconceptions that people understand in this market is they think that they're always going to get these big giant payouts from insurance companies. Absolutely not the case. Insurance companies like CRS, ALE, Dan Housing, they're always negotiating lower rates. In fact, that's what their entire goal is. They want to negotiate lower rates so they don't have to use up additional living expense expense that those clients and policyholders actually have. One of the other things about this partnership with CRS and Airbnb is that this can generally drive the prices down. This can create more competition, and with more competition yields prices that typically drop. So if you've built your entire portfolio just on insurance temporary housing, this is a great indicator that you need to shift into other markets that don't necessarily involve insurance companies. And this is where corporate housing, working directly with home health agencies, travel nursing companies, corporate gigs that are coming through. I have a lot of students and myself that have been working on Amazon warehouses that are being built from the ground up, where we actually house construction workers that are coming in different phases that are typically a year or longer. What actually works in the midterm rental space is by connecting and building relationships with the relocation specialists that actually work for these companies. So ALE Solutions, Dan Housing, all those specific type of companies, you want to actually be building relationships with those relocation specialists. The other thing about this is you absolutely need to understand as well that displaced families actually need fenced backyards, flexible spaces, flexible leases. Those are other things that a lot of other operators don't necessarily understand in this space. And again, this is a super massive connection between the client, who is the displaced policyholder, and you. Again, I believe this needs to be an extremely connective space, as these folks have went through devastating situations. I don't know if you ever lost anything in your life, especially a house. It is absolutely not a comfortable position to be in. That's where you as a landlord get to actually take initiative and bring these folks in, and they will remember you for a lifetime. One of the other things about this is that you need to make sure that you're actually offering flexibility, extensions, and with rebuilds that people have when they lose properties, they actually take a lot longer than you would necessarily think. So people that are listed on Airbnb might only have 3 months, and they have random bookings that are afterwards. So that's going to be a troublesome situation for people that are listing on Airbnb that have gaps to fill. These extensions are going to happen, and what are they going to do? Reject the people that are actually staying there for the weekend over the next several months? And most importantly, not relying extensively on insurance housing. This has been something that I've been talking about for years, that I did see these shifts happening in the market. I did see them coming soon, and they've actually came a lot faster than I thought. And this is why most of my students have been extremely successful, because they have diversified beyond just insurance clients. And this is something that I'm explaining to you guys today that you absolutely need to think about. People are always asking me what I use to manage my midterm rentals, and I love TurboTenant. TurboTenant is the best way to screen tenants, create specific leases, and collect rent from your guests. It's really the easiest way to do it. Plus, you don't have to overcomplicate rental management when things and tools are there to actually help you. I like TurboTenant because they allow you to customize your own leases for midterm rentals, and you have bonus features like online condition reports that are super helpful for your organization, especially for organized turnover. The best part is TurboTenant is literally less than your Netflix subscription. You can check them out at turbotenant.com/Jesse for special details. So you're probably asking yourself, well, what should I do if I'm either looking to house people, or I actually been housing insurance temporary housing for quite some time? That was actually my shift. Well, I'm gonna actually talk to you about strategy and diversification. So how I've been explaining to my students and how I've been doing this for years is you have to actually position yourself as this market evolves. So this is something that has been happening for quite some time. I've talked about Airbnb being in the 7th inning. It's already been around since 2007. We've watched Lux. You guys remember when Lux was a whole thing with Airbnb, kind of evolved and changed into this in this space. But now with midterm rentals continuing to evolve, I feel like midterm rentals are in the 1st inning. Actually, I've talked about this on Bigger Pockets a few years ago, where I thought that Airbnb was in the 6th or 7th inning, kind of rolling along, getting into baseball season. Go Giants. In the midterm rental space, if we had to put that into innings, like we were just getting started. The umpires were just out there. The grounds crew was flooding the fields with water. They were just putting the chalk lines out. That's how early we are in the midterm rental space. Although it has been around for 50 years, we're talking about global and mass adoption, which is actually bigger in Europe than it is in the United States. So what I'm suggesting for everybody to do right now is to look at corporate housing relationships, the relocation specialist, as being a percentage of who you're going to be going after. And what I mean by that is look at a pie chart. This is me pretending to put a pie chart together. Allocate 20% of that pie chart to insurance temporary housing, another 20% to travel nursing, another 25% to corporate hubs, and another 25% to reaching out with local companies that are in your own backyard to try to supply clients that are going to be lasting or staying for more than 30 days at a time, and typically, hopefully 3 months, maybe 6 months, or even a year or longer, which I talk about on this channel all the time, how to find those specific types of clients. The other thing about this is it's really important to make sure that you're creating different and direct connections with multiple different types of client sources, which we talked about a minute ago. That's travel nurses, travel agencies, corporate housing companies, If you're wanting to look at what's actually happening in your backyard, is there new Amazon plants coming up? You have any companies that actually have, like Gallo Winery, that has conveyor belts. There's people that actually come work on those for months at a time. And there's probably a lot more of these kind of companies in your own backyard, even in rural markets, that you have no clue about. When you build relationships directly, you're actually insulated from these industry shifts. And this is an important thing to remember because, again, we want to build a long roadway of a business that we actually own. That doesn't matter if market shifts or not. We can see what's happening, but we're actually looking around the bend to see what is going to happen. And that's what I've been talking about for so many years now. And we're starting to see it happen in real time. And the crazy thing about this is exactly what I've been talking to my students about for years now. Did I just say yours? For years. So here's what you need to actually do right now to get ahead of everything else. You need to evaluate the properties that you have for what insurance companies are actually looking for. And when I mentioned what they're actually looking for is, do you have flexibility with your terms? Is your calendar wide open? Do you have fenced backyards? Do you have flexibility when it comes to your leases? Did I just say leases? Tesla? When it actually comes to your leases, do you actually have the ability to go walk through a property, or do you have somebody that's connected to go and actually do that? These companies are massively seeking flexibility, and that's where most traditional long-term investors and or short-term rental operators just don't actually have that. One of the other things that I would tell you that would be extremely important, and this is something I've been doing for some time now, is actually building relationships with their local insurance adjusters before competition actually intensifies. And you're absolutely going to want to diversify your client base beyond insurance housing. One of the other things that I would be focusing on too is focus specifically on service elements that our institutional players can actually compete with, or they can't even get close to matching. And that might be an on-site concierge, that might be you actually walking and meeting with the family in real time. That might be you actually sending grocery delivery service to those families. That might be you actually buying a fire pit for somebody, or maybe adding a bunk bed for a child that's in the property. Institutional buyers and institutional operators are never going to think on that customer service level ever. And that's where you and I actually have one of the biggest advantages over any of these big giant players. Remember, this is a relationship-based business, not just a real estate play. So this CRS Airbnb partnership is just the very beginning. As I've talked about in the past, I do see a lot of institutional companies coming into this space. I see it continuing to evolve, and this is just going to be one of many other insurance companies that are going to get on a database that has over 7 million properties. But again, you and I have still such a massive advantage over every single other operator by far, especially if you're building relationships and you're connecting with these relocation specialists, because again, at the end of the day, they're going to value a relationship more than they're going to value going on some random Airbnb and sending a note to somebody, and hopefully they understand exactly the nuances that come along with this business. And as I've talked to many people that actually operate in the insurance temporary housing space right now, they are panicking. They're actually worried about the potential of this. And the reality is CRS and other companies have been going on these platforms for years. And to be honest with you, this is not something new, but this partnership is strategic. And I see this happening even deeper, which is again why we need to be way more thoughtful on how we're actually curating our businesses. One of the cool things about this, and I've talked about before, is I've been actually positioning myself for years to stay ahead of this curve. And I've watched this happening and the shift happen. I actually talked about this at the 2023 Midterm Rental Summit, literally 3 years ago. I'm actually holding another Midterm Rental Summit in literally the next 20 days, where I'm going to be teaching people exactly what to do if they're wanting to get into contract, they're wanting to build out of the institutional capital space. If you're wanting to actually create a business where you're going after companies and businesses and creating relationships, I actually teach people how to do that. But the cool thing about this, Pace Morby is going to be there. He's going to be talking about creative finance. Ziana McIntyre, author of 30 Days Stay, is going to be talking how to invest out of state and how to sub 2 into these deals, which is Pace Morby's great way of doing that. We're also going to have Dan Martell, who is like one of the leading business coaches, who wrote the book Buy Back Your Time, which for those of you that are actually operating like a business like I do and many of my students, we go after these companies. We need to buy back our time, and Dan's going to be talking specifically how we can actually do that. So if you want to learn more about, there's going to be a link down below. It's going to say Midterm Rental Summit. Click it. I would love to see you there. But let's get back into what I was actually talking about right here. As I mentioned before, if you've been actually following my advice, then you're clearly ahead of the curve. And that's one of the biggest and most important things that I've been trying to scream from the rooftops, literally for the longest time. So let me know in the comments, is this something that you're actually prepared for? Are you worried about these changes? Do you even subscribe to this channel? Do you want to know about industry insights and things that are happening? You need to make sure you're subscribed to this. So I'd love to hear from you guys. What's your thoughts? What's your concerns? Is this something to worry about? Do you see a mass adoption happening from other companies going into this space? Let me know. Let me know your thoughts. But again, stay prepared, stay diligent. I do believe the best is going to come. So don't be afraid of these shifts that are happening. We've actually been talking about this for years. We're prepared and we're ready to move forward. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.